I'm Trey Smith of God in a Nutshell. In this particular video, we're going to be taking a look at what's known as the Durupınar site. It's a formation in Turkey, right on the border of Iran, where many believe, very controversial site, but one that as new technologies emerge, gains more and more substantial evidence to be taken seriously. It is a formation on the ground right next to this ridge here and right by the Twin Peaks of Ararat that quite simply has the shape of Noah's Ark. Now, here on the back of the screen behind me, these are some of the scans that we're talking about in this particular film. This is an underground scan of the site, the Durupınar site that we're looking at in this video, or one of the sites that we're looking at on this video. These particular scans, and by the way, they're ones we're going to be examining in this film that are more impressive, actually far more impressive than this one on the back of the screen. And this one could even be described as a money shot. This imagery, by the way, in this particular instance is provided by John Larson. A special thanks to John Larson and the work that he has done on the what are called Ark scans. We are going to be examining all of the new data in the hunt for Noah's Ark in this film. And if you feel like this is an enjoyable journey, then you come over to godinanutshell.com anytime that you like, where there are plenty more just like it. I'm Trey Smith of God in a Nutshell. Let me welcome you to Noah, the new evidence. And as we begin and dive in, I'm actually a little bit proud of these. We've also got God in a Nutshell coffee mugs. Now, to put this in perspective, the rise of the first civilizations in the entire world are right down here, Sumer and Akkad. Both of these following the fertile ground. This is the Fertile Crescent by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers right here. Many of the sites that archaeologists believe are some of the oldest sites, like Göbekli Tepe, are going to be right up in here, heading towards where the mountains of Ararat, where it's recorded on the Epic of Gilgamesh, as well as a variety of other ancient documents where the boat landed, including, of course, the pages of Genesis. Right next to those mountains also, and coincidentally, is where the oldest winery in the world has been discovered, where, coincidentally, that Durupınar formation, the exact size and measurements, by the way, of what's recorded in the biblical pages of Genesis as being the exact length and width of Noah's Ark, is found. Now, I don't want to take a position on whether that Durupınar site is Noah's Ark. I believe more research needs to be done. Many believe that that site is in fact the biblical Noah's Ark. And I take the site quite seriously. But additionally, there are many who will make a great case that the boat is on top of Greater Ararat and a few other sites. The search continues, but in this particular video, without further ado, we'd like to talk to Andrew Jones of Discovered Media, who has been working and doing scans of the Durupınar site. Without further ado, here's Andrew Jones. So Andrew, kind of tell me, what's the name of this site that's behind you?
Yeah, so we're standing here near the village of Üzengili, eastern Turkey. And right behind me is this boat-shaped formation that is known as the Durupınar Ark site.
Now, the Durupınar site is named after a Turkish pilot. This is an artist's recreation. Right here you can see the Durupınar formation. They put Noah's Ark inside of it. This formation was originally part of a mud flow. So it's believed that this formation and the Ark, if that's what it be, were originally on top of, or near the top of, this ridge up here called Judgment Mountain or Doomsday Mountain. This right here is the original photograph taken by İlhan Durupınar in 1959. They were doing patrols, so the Turkish army or they were doing air patrols, and these are the photographs that he took, which got national attention. You can see that it clearly has the shape of a some kind of a vessel. Now, there are many that will claim that there are formations like this all over the place. I'm sorry, I have looked, and so have others, and there simply aren't. There is not another like this to be found. This is an image of what that formation looks like today, and on this side I have some imagery of ground scans that have been done by the folks over at Noah's Ark Scans. By the way, all of these scans that I'm going to show you can be found at that website, noahsarkscans.com, I believe, or at Discovered Media, where Andrew Jones is out there. They've actually built an entirely new tourist center. It should be noted that the Turkish government officially declares this site, the Durupınar site, as being Noah's Ark. They recognize it as Noah's Ark. These scans come from 7 meters deep, and what we're looking at on the screen here is they're beginning to find what many feel are grid-like patterns, although it's unknown whether it's naturally formed in some grid-like patterns underground or if it's man-made. It is being requested by Noah's Ark Scans, Andrew Jones, and others to do core drilling would be the next step to determine what's under there. Some of the audio here and there in this interview with Andrew Jones is a touch rough in spots, but is still pretty good for the remote location that he's at. Andrew also does tours. The real Mount Sinai, the Red Sea, where the Red Sea crossing was, and of course the Durupınar site at Discovered Media. Andrew, tell me some of the reasons why. We can clearly see it shaped like a boat. Tell me some of the reasons why that you know that it might be the Ark.
Yeah, so in the Bible, Moses, who we believe wrote the book of Genesis, gave some descriptions about, number one, how the Ark looked, the measurements for the boat, and where it landed after the flood. And so if you look at those criteria, this site matches. So let's go through the list. Number one, in Genesis chapter 8, verse 4, Moses talks about how the ark landed in the mountains of Ararat.
Now, when it reads the mountains of Ararat, or the mountains of Urartu, that's really an entire mountain range. But the mountains, the largest mountains would be, Greater Ararat, seen right here, and Lesser or Little Ararat, the twin peaks of Ararat. They can be seen for many, many miles in any direction around them. And in fact, these sites where this particular formation would be within the kingdom of Urartu. In fact, the area where this formation is called the Land of the Eight, or the Place of the Eight. That's what the locals have called it for literally thousands of years.
Yeah, so in ancient times, when they translated some of these writings, this area was called Armenia. So you see like the English translation for like Josephus and the Jewish historian who lived just after the time of Christ. He talks about the ark being still seen in his day in the mountains of Armenia. So this is the same area. Now the current international borders, which are defined right now, shows that this site, yes, we're in Turkey, and the mountains of Ararat, most of them are in Turkey. The famous Mount Ararat and its lesser peak, the whole thing is in Turkey.
So that area where that formation, that Durupınar formation, where Andrew Jones is literally standing at as I do the interview, that's on the border of Turkey and Armenia is where that is. Now he referenced Flavius Josephus, or Josephus. Josephus was a historian, a Jewish historian, who wrote famously about a lot of subjects, but particularly in this instance about the location of Noah's Ark. And this is what Josephus wrote. And I said, now of all the writers of barbarian histories, they make mention of this flood, the global flood, and of this ark. Now, what he means by barbarian histories, in my view, I think, Well, might be, for example, the Atrahasis tablet. Atrahasis is a name for Noah. Noah is Atrahasis on the Atrahasis tablet. The name Atrahasis means exceedingly wise one, or under some translations, one with exceedingly long life. Or, down here, the Erudigenesis, where Noah is the legendary Sumerian king who built a boat to escape the deluge. Noah's, of course, covered also on the Sumerian kings list, or the Great Flood is covered on the Sumerian kings list. More than this, you would have, of course, the writings of, famously, the writings of the great king Gilgamesh. Now, Gilgamesh takes, and also, right here I would point out the Babylonian Ark tablet. So on this tablet, it's covering, they wrote about the global flood and Noah all the time. On this tablet, we're writing about the animals coming on board 2 by 2. However, probably no ancient tablet gives us more, many of them give us a lot of details. The Atrahasis tablet certainly does. The Atrahasis tablet will tie you right into Gilgamesh, who gives you a wealth of details about the location of that ark. For example, you're being told it's between 2 peaks, and then it's right next to a ridge or a mountain of judgment, a wall of judgment, or a doomsday mountain is what Gilgamesh is telling you on his stone where he went and visited Noah. We go through this heavily. That actually ties into the history of this place that we've been going through on the films Vol. 1 and 2, literally that Genesis series that we're walking through in more depth. But Josephus continues. For when he was describing, he's talking about Berossus the Chaldean here, for when he was describing the circumstances of the flood, he goes on thus. It is said that there is still some part of the ship, so there are parts of the ship left in Armenia, where Andrew Jones is standing. By the way, Andrew does tours of that site. You could actually use help looking at that site. I'm going to talk about that in some of the history of people who have done a lot of digging in a minute. But it is said that there's still some part of the ship in Armenia, at the mountains there, and that people carry off pieces. Basically, they keep little trinkets of the ship, which they take away and use chiefly as amulets or just souvenirs. They're taking away souvenirs. Now, if you've got people picking apart souvenirs from the boat for thousands of years, or who knows how long, eventually there's no boat left. I would also point out that, and I would be the first guy that would want that boat to be found frozen in an ice cube on top of the mountain, or that guys, even guys that I know and like, I hope that one day they scale down one of those ice walls, chip in there, like Tom Cruise coming down from a Mission Impossible movie, and find sections of that boat. There's nothing that I would love more than that. However, if it requires Mission Impossible style ropes to go find the ship, then it would be even harder in Josephus's day for tourists to go and get pieces of it. It does seem like Josephus, as well as Gilgamesh, are describing, Gilgamesh might have been one of the first tourists to go and look at the boat. And for thousands of years, you've got people out there buying chunks of it until there might be what you just have left today. A possible remains of where the boat once was. And by the way, I would consider it lucky, or God himself, that if that be, it requires more investigation. If that be where the ship was, that we even have that left, and what's underneath, possibly.
And we know from ancient historians that there were ancient tourists, just like we are today, coming to see the boat. In the past, there were the same type of people who wanted, there were pilgrims. Josephus talks about them taking little pieces of the boat as souvenirs. And so we can just logically realize that as a tourist coming here, as you see trash sometimes laying around here, like bags for chips and energy drink bottles, back then they probably left pottery pieces and whatever as a tourist. And so you would expect to find some of that at this landing site for Noah's Ark. And in fact, up there at the top of the mountain where we believe the Ark originally came down from, there are archaeological remains. So that's just right here in the general area of the boat. Now, if you look at the region, you do find Ur-2 archaeological sites and castles and settlements. Now, again, Urartu is the ancient name for Ararat, and this was a kingdom that inhabited this region of the world. And so we're exactly in the mountainous region of this kingdom. So you find there's settlements across the valley from here. Just west from here, there's a castle on a hill that they built. And then just nearby that castle, there's an area called the Valley of Eight. There were 8 people that survived the flood, according to the Bible. And in that valley, called Valley of Eight, you find these huge stones with holes in them. And maybe another day we could go out to that site and show that to you guys. But that's about 20 miles from here.
Now, here's some of these strange stone things that he's talking about. Sometimes called, some people call them anchor stones. They're a controversial issue. There's actually quite a lot of these. There's actually the Karahunge stones, one of the oldest, what some call the oldest Stonehenge in the world, is not very far from, well, not very far as a crow flies, no pun intended, from where Andrew is standing. And they're just these stones with these little holes in the top. Now, I'm going to put one on the screen while I'm talking that is actually from out there in the Valley of the Eight. Now, I have no idea if some of these, there's clearly more of them than would go on Noah's Ark. What's funny about this is on the Epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh is talking about anchor stones on the boat he takes down there, but he's also talking about these strange stone markers that they're looking for as the guide of the way, if you will, to find Utnapishtim or Noah. And out there in those areas, you have these stones that some believe are anchor stones. Now, here behind me on the screen, this is an artist rendering back here of kind of a description of what the anchor stones would look like. Anchor stones are real. They did exist on ancient boats, and they help keep stability. Now, I had looked back and forth, and does the boat actually require the anchor stones? My personal opinion is no, it doesn't require them. But did it have them on there? Well, clearly they were used in the ancient world. In fact, on the Epic of Gilgamesh, on tablet 10, it states, "It's in your hands, Gilgamesh, that prevents the crossing. You have smashed the stone things." And it goes on and on about these stone things, these strange stone things that are markers. You have pulled out their retaining ropes. So it's clear in Gilgamesh we're talking about anchor stones in this section of the text. The stone things have been smashed. The retaining ropes have been pulled out. Why are the stone things of the boat smashed to pieces, and someone is not their master sailing upon it? These are the words from the writings of Gilgamesh. The stone things, the way to Utnapishtim. So at some point in this, Gilgamesh is smashing stone things, which shouldn't come as terribly shocking. He throws temper tantrums a lot, smashes things to get attention. Almost sounds like your modern medias today. Actually, a lot of the pagan stuff on your ancient stones reads a lot like modern day music videos, modern day movies, modern day temper tantrums, and all of it that we see on television. Now, are these, or some portion thereof, are they anchor stones? I don't know. And if they were anchor stones, did people consider these holy stones and began to copy them? These are ideas we actually are exploring on the Genesis series. I have no idea if these are anchor stones or not. What I might point out, though, speaking of ancient stones or holy stones, or quite literally stones with holes in them, or writings that sound a lot like sort of witchy sounding modern day music videos. It's literally how they don't. A lot of times it's very ramblesome text, particularly on Gilgamesh, the Lord of Arata, the Merkur and the Lord of Arata. But you find these are called hag stones, and they have holes in them, or holy stones is what they are. Here's one here, here's one that's the size of a megalith, here's one large enough that a child could crawl through, here's little tiny ones. Sometimes people involved in witchcraft and black magic or the sort, wear them on necklaces. They believed in the ancient world, they believed that we're modern today, that the spirits, that the world of the spirits would be on the other side of the stones, which I find interesting. Also, you have ancient dolmens, which, well, they look like a table. They've also commonly got sort of a hole underneath. These are for the spirits. So the spirits, either to ward off evil spirits or to a lot of ancestor worship was in the past, stretching all the way back to the days of Nimrod and Noah. Now, if I look at the writings of Enmerkar and the Lord of Arata, we find some sort of strange things. That's what this little document here is. Now, in Enmerkar, I can make an incredibly strong case to you on Nimrod and the Tower of Babel. Stream it over at God in the Nutshell, if you like. But in Enmerkar is the biblical Nimrod. The case for that's incredibly strong. In fact, on these very stones, where these are the longest letters that he ever wrote. So scholars will debate who the Lord of Arata is. They believe it's a king that lived up there in the Ararat Mountains. I would make the case, and I could be wrong, but I submit to your hands, that these are the longest letters that he ever wrote. He's going on and on and on about all of the temples that he's built and that he wants to build this great tower. And then later we're talking about the tongues being split up at that tower on these very stones. So it would be hard to argue this is not Nimrod. And they talk about Noah and all of these other rocks from Gilgal. He's the most important character that they write to. And these are the longest letters that Nimrod ever wrote. So I would make the case, and he's stating that he's sending his best messengers up there to deliver these rocks up to the Lord of Arata. And at one point, he's delivering the best barley of all Uruk up there to the Lord of Arata. Now, with barley, you can make beer, right? And he's sending this up to sending it to Noah, maybe. Whatever the case, this is what he wrote on these stones. Speaking of holy stones that would later become, see, in the occult world, they commonly take, for example, witches and warlocks and wizards, they have a staff, right? Well, if you look in the Bible, the origin of when carrying a staff would be Moses, or even before this, it would be, and yeah, sure, we read that Adam had a staff that was passed down through the generations. These be incredible artifacts to have, but the occult will twist them into occult items. Long and short of this is, following that flood, you have two different paths. One that thinks demons are good, and the other that demons are bad. Nimrod's path, he began writing stones like the one here. He says, let the people of Arata, now just for the fun of it, let's replace the word Arata, and I could be wrong on that. That Arata means, no, of course, Arata would be a reference to the mountains of Ararat, where he's writing to the Lord of Arata. But in those stones, in those documents, you discuss, Enmerkar is writing, when Nimrod is writing to the Lord of Arata, talking about a building of a tower to the gods. He talks about a confusion of tongues, ultimately, in this set of letters that are a back and forth of arrogant writing, arrogance on the part of Nimrod or Enmerkar, writing to the Lord of Arata. And here again, in these ancient legends, like the Eridu Genesis in my hand right here, Eridu is where the Tower of Babel, in my view, would take its rise. This little artifact guy in my hand right here. You could almost come to the conclusion that Noah was the number one thing that the medias at that time even thought about. These images behind me come from Answers in Genesis, their Noah's Ark exhibit, and the Legends section of that exhibit. Noah, of course, was a legend in his time. The Aztecs of Mexico, the Sun Age lasted 676 years. And then a great flood killed everyone but Nota, notice the names, and his wife, Nina, who were told to stop making an alcoholic drink called pulque. They made a great boat out of cypress. As I flip the page, in the Mayans of Central America, after a flood, only 4 couples existed, but 3 of them repopulated the entire earth. The Mayans also tell of a time where the people gathered into one place and discovered how to make fire, like the fire pits of Babylon, and then learned that they could no longer understand one another. Their tongues got confused. This is according to the Mayans. Interestingly enough, the wives were said to have been created while the men slept. This is in the Mayan legend. Now flip the page, the Arawaks. The world was destroyed twice because of man's wickedness, according to their legend, once by fire and once by water. At the flood, a wise chief named Merawana was told of the coming flood and saved himself and his family in a very large canoe. Now, I want to be clear about this. I don't make up the names and the legends. I'm just trying to pronounce them as accurately as they look to be spelled. We flip to this page. The Norse. They believed, whose name means mountain crier, believed he survived a flood caused by the blood of the great frost giant, a giant that drowned everyone except Berglimir and his wife, who were preserved in a boat. So, but even if one were to argue, Trey, I think you're a little bit off on some of these naming conventions. This is the Sumerian Kings list. I've been breaking it down. You'd be absolutely correct that I wasn't personally there. A lot of these pagan stones, they're talking about Noah all the time. And Nimrod is actually a key figure. That even if one were to argue it's off a little here, a little there, I think that even an atheist would agree that it's beginning to hone in close, even on their ancient pagan stones and the breakdowns of them. And I give myself some liberty on God in the Nutshell in our Genesis series to kind of explore that, but that the same naming conventions, the same people, characters, and actual real people, not just characters, that you're finding on these ancient pagan rocks are the same people that you're finding on the biblical text. And the same ancient family feud that you're finding right here on this stone as well, the Sumerian Kings list, is going to rewind you backwards to this family. And that the number one person that they all thought about on all their little ancient pagan rocks was in fact Noah, under hundreds of names over time. But let's just, for the fun of it, let's just pop the name Noah in there. Just like Noah would be Utnapishtim on Gilgamesh, no one argues that. He would be Atrahasis on the Atrahasis tablet. He's the largest character that they ever mention. They love him, they hate him, they can't stop talking about him. Noah. Let's just pop the name Noah in there. The people of Noah shall bring down the mountain stones. What's he talking about? From their mountain. Now, he talks earlier in the text that he wants Noah to pack gold nuggets in sacks for him. So this is something more valuable than the gold nuggets, some kind of holy stones he wants. He wants the stones from their mountains. And shall build the great shrine for you. This is Inanna speaking. She's talking about Nimrod, that Noah is going to erect the abode of the gods, the great shrine of the gods, is what being stated here on the text. And erect a great abode for you, will cause the great abode, the abode of the gods, to shine forth for you, will make your me. Now remember, we talked about before, the holy me is me. That is, in their language, that stands for the secret knowledge from the other side of the flood, the secret knowledge of the gods. Flourish in the Kulaba, that basically means a brick-built Uruk. Will make the Abzu, this means abyss, the domain of the underworld god Enki. The Abzu grow for you like a holy mountain. These texts just go on and on and on with this. It really does sound like a modern day, well, maybe a better version of a modern day sort of witchy music video. Now the Lord of Arata, whoever that may be, will reply to these messages because, see, Nimrod's got to have, there's no cell phones back then. So he's having his top messengers, he's stating, and they're going to write on these stones. And then the Lord of Arata, if that be Noah or if that be somebody else, is going to write the reply make new stones, write the reply, and the messengers are going to bring it back. So literally he's going from Ur and Uruk, he's sending the stones, all the way up through his Nimrod, all the way up to a king, probably Noah, up there in the Ararat Mountains. And the kind of reply, so imagine you wrote these lengthy messages on little stones like this one that I have over here. And by the way, when you use the name Lord of Arata, this is something, so Nimrod views himself as a lord, dark lord Nimrod, who he's writing to. He doesn't view as a king. He himself refers to as a lord, something much more than a king. But imagine you're writing these lengthy messages on little rocks like this, talking about, I built the brick-built Kulaba, the Uruk that you've built, and all of these things that you're being boastful and proud. And write these long-winded messages to someone. It takes months to get a reply, and when they do reply, they reply things like, what is any of this to me that your master has spoken? What is it to me that your master has said? These are literally the replies that Nimrod is getting back from, in my opinion, probably Noah. Okay, so on these little rocks, and I'm being a little bit facetious, but he's basically stating, what has this got to do with me? I thought through your grandfather Ham, right here, the first sun god of all earth, self-proclaimed sun god, starting a lineage of sun gods. Also, your grandfather is stating he's a sun god. Now, you guys selling timeshares as well? Let me guess, you've got another pyramid scheme to sell us. No pun intended. Not being a little facetious, but the replies that are... So, Nimrod is clearly on these stones expecting to get respectful replies. But instead, he's getting replies that are like, what does any of this got to do with me? Didn't we throw the sun god of earth? Didn't we throw him out of here shamefully? And by the way, there's indications on some of the other stones from the pagan side of it that the reason he might have been thrown out of there, couldn't keep his hands off of other people's kids. And he's writing the stones all the way from down here in Uruk, basically down here by Eridu, all the way up to the Ararat Mountains, and having to wait for the replies for these messages. And he continues, may the people marvel admiringly, and may Utu, now commonly I believe and can make a strong case for you that Utu probably is Noah's rebellious son Ham. This is where the division of the sons happens, is right after the flood. And you literally see it in the artifacts. You begin to see some pagan artifacts emerge that are glorifying Tammuz, the devil, the goat, and and all sorts of immorality of different forms and human sacrifice. And on the other end of it, you have people up there in the mountains that are even referred to on some of these later stones as the righteous ones that are up there. In fact, there are some legends that come right off of their pagan rocks that I find them particularly telling, which we delve into right here in the VOV Part 1 and Part 2, which are available for streaming over on God in a Nutshell. We delve into, so here's Utu right here, and I'm suggesting to you very, very heavily the possibility that that's Noah's rebellious son Ham being told, son, we've had enough of you. Go ahead and pack your stuff and get out. Here's a cylinder seal where you have Utu, our first witch that would start the Babylonian Empire, the practices of Babylon. Wherever he's coming from, he's getting thrown out from between two mountain peaks. And in fact, it's on those very legends that we discuss in these, where it's referring to a set of righteous people that live up there in those mountains, place that old Utu was thrown from. May Utu, Ham, witness it in joy in the place of the Dumazid. Dumazid is another word for what we would later today call Tammuz. So may Tammuz witness Noah bring me his holy stones, possibly stones used on the boat, maybe stones used from an altar Noah had, but whatever it was up there that they viewed as holy, that they now want to usurp, like the staff of Moses, and make it something demonic, and he wants to use it in the building of his tower. That's how I'm interpreting exactly what's being stated on this document, and that the Dumazid will be thrilled and leap with joy where the goats and lambs are numerous. Notice the biblical language embedded right in these documents. The people of Arata, let's just use the word Noah, the people of Noah shall run around for Nimrod. It's in Nana. Notice in Nana back here, she's holding a lion by the nose. She's got it captive. She looks like the modern day pop star goddess of her age. She's got her little leggy kicked out there. She is the seductress of the ancient world, the first one. Right there at that Tower of Babel, in the place where the Dumazid, Tammuz, Where the goats and the lambs are numerous, the people of Noah shall run around for you, Nimrod. They shall run around for you as you whip them, the people of Noah shall. Like mountain sheep, notice the biblical language, in the fields of Tammuz, the Dumazid. That's what's being stated right on these rocks. I know it's almost too offensive to believe, isn't it? Rise like the sun, the birth of the sun gods, over my holy breast. You are the jewel of my throat, Nimrod. Praise be to you in Merkur, son in the line of Utu. That's what's being stated. This is literally what's being written. He's writing this to Noah, who's replying to him basically, what has this got to do with me? Get your life straight, kid. That's what's being recorded in the best that a pagan could on these pagan stones. Now, I'd like to take us for just a moment back over to where this sort of division happens amongst the sons. And right after the flood, basically in Genesis 8, because as we've commonly covered in these films, so Noah released two different birds, a raven and a dove. And the occult systems, like the Apkello with the bird heads that you find in Babylon and ancient Sumer and Akkad, and spread all across the globe, in truth. So those pagan systems favored the raven, the falcon, the crow. The biblical text favors the dove, just like the Spirit of God rested upon Jesus like a dove. Well, the raven was the workless bird, if you remember, and so it just went to and fro in the air. That's what is told to you that the raven did. The bird that the pagans favored. Just as in the book of Job, when Satan went before the Lord says, where have you come from? And he said, I've gone to and fro, just like the raven, the worthless bird that we read about in Genesis that Noah released. Pagans, they favor the raven. Christians, they favor the dove. Genesis 8, the number of new beginnings. Notice the numbers here. On the 17th day, notice the numbers, 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest in the mountains of Ararat, those Ur-2 mountains, right out there where Andrew is. And that applies whether the boat is on top of the mountain, whether it's right there at the Durupınar site where Andrew is standing, or whether it's somewhere else. On the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest in the mountains of Ararat, Ur-2. And the waters continued to recede until the 10th month. And on the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains began to become visible. And after 40 days, Noah opened the window he had made in the ark, and he sent out a raven. But it went to and fro, back and forth, until the waters had dried up from the earth. Then, verse 8, the number of new beginning down there, Noah sent out a dove. Now, if I come back over to Genesis 8 for just a minute, number 8, that's the number of new beginnings. That's literally the chapter where Noah releases the raven. That's the bird that the pagans favor, and the dove, bird that the Christians would, the symbol of the dove. Well, in Genesis 8, where he releases the raven and the dove, and I look over at the two peaks of Ararat, in fact, right out there where that Durupınar site is, just where Andrew is standing, literally a stone's throw from where Andrew is standing, we find the Korgakon Maz, if I pronounce that properly, village, where, and remember, it was in Genesis 8, where the crow, the raven, the falcon, and the dove were both released. Well, that village, its name means the raven won't land. In fact, if one was talking about the division of the two sons, the lineage that would go through Ham, leading to Nimrod, Babylon, all of it, all occult today, or the lineage coming through over here through Shem that would ultimately lead to Israel and would lead to Jesus Christ. Well, these are two different paths. And even at the start of that, what we read in Yasher, what we read in Genesis is that Noah put a curse on Ham's son Canaan, and that Ham kept trying to wiggle up inside of the tent. In the book of Yasher, we read that Ham stole these garments, his garments from Noah that had come all the way down from Adam. He longed to steal something. He believed it was a holy item, a holy object. In fact, this is what the occult doesn't do sometimes, but they do all the time. They take objects of God and they turn them into occult objects. So whether you have stones that look like this hag stone here or this one here, or ones that are worn around the witch's necklace, or ancient dolmens or giant megaliths that would later arise, or perhaps stones that were part of Noah's altar. When he got off of the boat, he made a sacrifice unto the Lord, and the occult, Nimrod's empire, which beginning with Ham, would try to usurp and try to twist that and turn these into occult items. This is literally what is being written on those little rocks, that Nimrod wants Noah and the people of Noah to come down. He wants to use items that were from Noah, that were passed down from the lineage of Adam. This is what I'm reading. Or items that just belonged to Noah, that he viewed as holy items. And the cherry on top of his giant tower, he's wanting Noah to come and bow down to him, pay homage to him, and use the items from his lineage, from his ancestor, and the worship of God himself to build a pagan tower to worship Satan, is what he's wanting. And in fact, some of these pagan stones are extraordinarily telling. They're giving you the backdrop, just like any story. If you know the backdrop behind it, it takes on a whole new life. And the pagan rocks are off here, there, yonder. They're messy. They're pagan stones all over the place. But in Gilgamesh, for example, he's telling you that where he ultimately found Noah was by a doomsday mountain or judgment mountain. That's what that's called up there. Or he actually describes this ridge to you, and he describes it as Noah lived by a wall of heaven, is what he's writing on these rocks. That's the directions that he's giving to where he actually met Utnapishtim, or Noah. Now, Noah and Nimrod, and I actually have a whole section that comes off of the rocks that come from Sumer and Akkad, and Marker and the Lord of Arata and some other legends. And you have the right. I felt like it was important to put together both in the films and in the books that sort of actually go with the films, which look great on a coffee table. That's what they look like on the inside. The section that I actually call the War of Noah, and this is what I speculate happened. You have the right to look at these legends and make your own decision what they were talking about and how it fits like a glove, in my view, with the biblical text. Both the biblical text as well as the pagan text are telling you that Noah as well as Nimrod lived at the same time, at least for a time. And through the lineage of Ham over here, and that's whether Utu is Ham or not, you're going to find the origin of Babylon comes through this line here that appears to be recorded on the Sumerian kings list. Ham is who stole the garments from Noah. Later in his lineage, Nimrod is he wants these holy stones. He wants Noah to come and bow down to him and pay homage to this tower that he's building. And his mind is so diluted, you can even read it on the stones. They really do read like a messy modern-day music video with someone whose mind is completely gone, is what they read like. But they are telling a tale of both a love of Noah and also a dire hatred of Noah. In fact, Noah must have regretted at points ever even building that ship. With the grandkids and the great-grandkids are literally, so that's one side, the lineage of Ham, the son that was thrown out of the camp, thrown from the pleasant 2 mountain peaks in the valley of the 8. Get out of here, son. We don't need you around anymore. And he would go and he would form the occult empires of earth of Babylon. On the other hand, you have the lineage of Shem, the son for whom Noah put the highest crown of blessing on. Through Shem's lineage, of course, you'd get Israel and later Jesus, but before that time, you would get Terah. Now, Terah was the head idol maker for Dark Lord Nimrod. He was also the father of Abram. He birthed Abram when he was 70 years old. 70, if you recall, is the Ayin. Ayin can either be full of light, can be a powerful symbol for God, the number 70, the Ayin. It's the symbol for Israel. Or it can be it can be the Ayin Ra, the eye of darkness is what it can be. It can be either one. And in this case, Terah was the head idol maker for Nimrod. There's Terah right there, and there's his idols. Terah was an idol maker. Now Terah had a son named Abram, and who would later go on to be called Abraham. And the witch doctors, the witchy people of Nimrod, had come in and told Nimrod that this child had been born to Terah's house, and that son would grow up to destroy their evil works and the entire empire. So Nimrod offered to give Terah money for the death of Abram. That's what Nimrod did. But Terah, and I'm getting this from Yasher, I'm also getting this from some of the legends that we go over in the Genesis series that we've been covering. It really does bring Genesis to life. So Terah, he swapped the child out with the child of a maidservant. And Nimrod was fooled. And Terah took Abram and he hid him in the caves. And then he had Abram taken up to live with Noah and Shem. So Abram was raised not in the house of the idol maker of Nimrod, but in the house of Noah and Shem. Now, those letters that we've been going over in Merkur and the Lord of Arata, I believe that the spirit behind Dark Lord Nimrod, that at the time that Abram was up there being raised by Noah and Shem, that even though Nimrod believed the child was dead, the spirit inside of Nimrod still was after that child, Abram, to kill him. And this is when Nimrod began writing, or in Merkur, began writing these lengthy letters. They're the longest letters in Merkur and the Lord of Rada that he ever wrote. And he's writing them up and for using the best messengers that he's got, and becoming more and more aggressive with Noah. Is what he's doing. And this is what he says. This comes out of the book of Nimrod. And these legends, you really, whether you agree with them or not, I lay that in your hand to decide, but I thought they needed to be put together for you. And that's what I've been doing in that Genesis series. You have the right to know them. I lay that in your hands. Arata, Noah, speaking of Noah, is indeed like slaughtered sheep. These are the words of Nimrod. Notice the biblical rhetoric in these. His roads are indeed like those of rebel lands. Messenger, speak to the Lord of Arata, Noah, and say to him, I have a very special garment. Notice how this comes up in the text right on the stones. A garment that is not black colored, that is not white colored, and that is not quite a mix of colors. But tell him that he can have this garment if he can win against me. So he's proposing a fight to Noah in exchange for some kind of a garment. I find that sort of fascinating. This is also the first time I shall send him a champion. This is what Nimrod is stating. My champion against his champion. This is the first time in history that I know of that you have recorded a David and Goliath fight. It may be the model of what would later be why kings used. So as opposed to running entire armies at each other, they would just use two of their best champions to fight one another. That's what he's proposing. This is probably the first time it was proposed in history. A literal David and Goliath fight over what Nimrod is stating, a set of garments. And even Anana is going to chime in and state that the garments were never stolen or something like this. I don't know what she's rattling off. Now, I want to be very clear that these parts that I have titled the War of Noah, this comes off of their pagans. These come out of pagan legends. These do not come out of the pages of Genesis. But it would be during the time between when Abraham gets sent up to live with Noah and Shem, and Nimrod has been sending these aggressive messages to this Lord of Arata, who I believe, just like on any of the other stones, is Noah. They're the longest letters and lengthiest messages that he ever wrote. And they get more and more aggressive, these letters. And the Lord of Arata, who I believe is Noah, just like on any of the other legends or rocks, is basically tried to brush him off, tried to ignore him. Look, find somebody else's address to spam and tell about your pyramid schemes. But that hasn't worked. That's made Nimrod more and more angry. And at this point of it, Nimrod is not just building his tower, but he thinks he's so big and bad that now he's going to go and he wants to make a show out of defeating this Lord of Arata. He's going to pick a fight with Noah to show how bad he is. And he's being egged on by Inanna. And it's actually this Lord of Arata, or Noah, who I believe is Noah, that is suggesting, why don't we send out our best warriors to fight with each other. This is probably because the Lord of Arata, well, in the text, he's clearly outnumbered, and desperately outnumbered. Now, what's fascinating about this is that Gilgamesh, who is also displayed as a giant, when he goes to visit Noah, well, he claims that he wants to fight with Noah. He doesn't really want to fight with Noah, but he claims that he wants to fight with Noah, which I find fascinating and ties into these very legends. I shall send him such a champion, my champion against his champion. Let the more able one prevail. Go say this, messenger. Tell this to the Lord of Arata. He goes on. Second, this is Nimrod giving his commands to Noah. Speak to him and say, in his city, in Noah's city, let Noah's people, go before him like sheep. And as he, Noah, goes in shame. This is Nimrod talking. Let the mountain humble itself before me, Nimrod. And let them, Noah's people, heap up shining gold and silver in the courtyard for Inanna. Third, tell him, me as Nimrod, you tell Noah, lest I make the people of Noah fly off that city mountain like a pack of wild doves from its tree, lest I smash them. And when he, Noah or Arata, goes, let him bring me the holy mountain stones, and let him, Noah, help build for me the great shrine of Eridu. That's the ziggurat of Eridu. I can make a strong case for you that was the Tower of Babel, and if it's not, it's close. That's what he's talking about, the great shrine of Eridu, place where he'll later state the tongues will be confused. It's important. The great shrine of Eridu that leads to the Abzu. That's the dimensional portal of the god Enki. The Abzu means abyss, the god of the abyss. And let them make its protection, the god of Noah's protection, now cover me and spread over my lands for me. And lastly, recite over Noah, Arata, this omen. Can you believe he even talks like this? This omen, this spell, this chant of the Enki, a spell of Enki or a chant of Satan over him, Noah. These are the things that Nimrod was writing. So if you were ever wondering why Noah thought to quickly plant a vineyard after the boat settled, you read just briefly on any of these ancient pagan documents how the kids and the grandkids and the great-grandkids, it'll clear that question up for you real fast, why he thought to plant a vineyard. And in fact, right there in Armenia, right there at the base of the two peaks of Ararat, the oldest winery in the world, the Arini Cave, has been discovered. And it's my belief that while he was writing all these arrogant stones, and he was ultimately getting so fed up because Noah would not simply submit to him. Imagine how upset Noah was. He even built that boat at points. He had to go before the Lord. But Nimrod was writing these kind of arrogant things. And he was ultimately going to make a spectacle of going to conquer and subdue and probably put in chains Noah, if not ultimately kill Noah, was the intent of Nimrod's heart. This is a timeline from Yasher that I've put together back here. And what I've got in the timeline is right over here. Abraham goes to live with Noah and Shem in the mountains. Now, it's during that time period where Abram is over there living in the mountains with Noah and Shem, learning from Noah and Shem, that Nimrod, my speculation, putting the rocks together with the pages of Genesis and the pages of Yasher, that Nimrod begins work on his Tower of Babel and is writing these arrogant stones up to Noah up there. And he doesn't know that the child Abram is still alive. He's going to go slaughter everybody. That's what he's going to go do in his anger and his rage. And it's my belief that it's at that point where where Nimrod has literally broken down, where it states right on the stones that his head came forth like a slithering serpent, and his rage came forth, and he was leaving. That's when his tower, when he was intent to go kill and conquer Noah, that his tower falls, and that his top men turn against him. All sorts of problems come forth on Nimrod. And then it would be later, it would be when Abram was 50 years old, that he leaves the care of Noah and Shem in the mountains, and he goes to visit his father, Terah, who lives down there where Nimrod is, and that the Tower of Babel has already fallen by that point. Nimrod does not know that this is the child, that Abram is the child that he intended to kill 50 years ago. And I actually sort of believe that had the Lord allowed Nimrod to go out there and one-on-one do a fight between Nimrod and Noah, that Noah would have whipped that kid silly and sideways, and you never even would have heard of Dark Lord Nimrod. Anyhow, it is these kind of things that we've been covering very much in depth in our Genesis series to give a more, with God in the nutshell, take what you like and leave the rest, but to give a more full-bodied view of all the different perspectives and writings, including Gilgamesh, who went up there to what appears to be these very locations or close, and even find out who Noah was, who I think he came to like more than Dark Lord Nimrod. But these are the stories and the legends of the origin of all of us, literally in this place, in my view. But the opening of many of your ancient sites with giant megalithic structures they begin right there around the ancient kingdom of Urartu, or ancient Armenia. In fact, not very far away, you're going to find the megalithic site of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. These are not just megalithic sites, but these are your opening megalithic sites is what these are, leading ultimately and stretching into not just the Tower of Babel, but pyramids and ziggurats that all look similar to each other, that stretch all across the earth. And one would literally expect to find, because your craftsmanship from the ancient world, these pyramids and building projects that mesmerize and amaze modern engineers. You can see the workmanship over time actually deteriorating to this modern age. One would literally expect to find megalithic building projects that mesmerize and amaze us, coming right through the bloodline of a family that built a ship like the one described in the pages of Genesis. And if I drop just right down a stone's throw from there, you're actually at the site of, where the Ebla stones come from. The Ebla stones, like this little guy that's in my hand right here, this little creation stone that I'm holding. Well, the Ebla stones are found, they're found right next to Haran, the property of Haran, which is literally named after Terah. Terah had two sons. He had Abram, later called Abraham, and he had Haran. And Haran, right next to Ebla, is named after Terah, the idol maker for Nimrod's son, Haran. That's who it's named after. Well, Haran is the property. It's these beehive-shaped buildings. Haran, this is the property, the Ebla tablets, Ebla, Syria. The Haran is literally named after the biblical Haran, the brother of Abram, or Abraham. That's his property. The Ebla tablets read things like, "The Lord of heaven and earth. The earth was not without you, for you created it. The light of day was not, for you created it, O Lord. The morning light had not yet been made. That comes from the Ebla tablets. There are about 16,000 of these little clay tablets that contain references. And by the way, they fight these to the hilt in the current archaeological community. It doesn't say anything biblical. Yes, it does. There's 16,000 of them. Ebla and Haran are right here. They're on the border. So Ebla would be modern-day Syria, whereas Haran would be modern-day Turkey, but they're a stone's throw from each other. And in fact, they're just above. So right here is Utu, who I believe is probably Noah's rebellious son Ham, his first Ebabar, or his first White House. It's right down here. You can see the chain of these megalithic sites moving through. Haran's property is right there, right above where Nimrod's grandfather would have his first White House, his first Ebabar. Ebla and Haran, right there. And they talk about everything from Sodom and Gomorrah, Baal, Abraham, and the Canaanites. In fact, Haran, seen right here, he's one of the two sons of Terah. Terah is recorded as the head idol maker for Nimrod. These are called terracotta idols over here, or perhaps teraphim, little teraphim idols. Teraphim means a worthless thing or a shameful thing. That's what Terah did. He was the head idol maker for Nimrod. That was his role. He was the father of both Haran and Abraham. Property you're looking at, where these stones come from, where they're also megaliths, it's right there by Göbekli Tepe. That's where his property literally is. That's his property line, is Göbekli Tepe, the son of Terah, Haran, the brother of Abram, and it covers all sorts of biblical artifacts, sites, and pagan gods. But if I come right up from Ebla and Haran, where the Ebla stones were discovered, and I pass Göbekli Tepe, no one's going to argue that's a megalithic site that's right there in the same area, and I come up right next to where Noah's Ark is recorded to have landed in both the biblical text and right there in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which his description of where he went to sounds a lot like where Andrew is standing. Well, we find the Arini cave system right there in Armenia. Now, this is it's the oldest winery known in the world. In fact, the oldest set of leather shoes, seen right here on the screen, have been discovered in that cave system. So, to keep the wine cool and chilled, well, stored wine in jugs. I mean, the jugs are still in there in the Arini cave system. We'll talk more about that as well in the Genesis series. And here's the bottom line. Even if I hop from the ancient Tower of Babel looking pyramids and ziggurats out in the ancient Americas, like the Mayans, where you find the Mayan calendar, notice how similar it looks to Utu's Sumerian sun disk, also a calendar. And by the way, in that Genesis series, one of the things we've been talking about, well, Utu's son is recorded on the Sumerian king's list to have journeyed and vanished into the seas and made travel suitable for the son of a sun god. All these are sun disk and sun temples. This is temple for the sun, a Mayan temple for the sun. But if I were to rewind backwards from the New World, where perhaps they had ships going, even at that time, certainly came from the right family for it, rewinding all the way backwards, rewinding backwards through all the ages of sun gods. I've got them actually itemized out for you here. There are 7 ages. There are actually 6 ages of empires. Some would call this Rome Phase 2 that you're living in now. But if we were to rewind backwards from the Romans to these are all sun gods on the screen that you're looking at. They're all an amalgamation. So each empire would amalgamate its beliefs into the secret societies or religions of the next empires, sun gods. Going backwards from the Romans to the Greeks to the Persians with the Mithra, to the Babylonians with the Shemesh, to the Egyptians with Ra, the sun god Ra with the sun disk encapsulated by the serpent, very telling, on top of his head, and all the way back to the beginning. And by the way, you can actually do the mathematics on the population growth, rewinding all the way backwards, all the way from the days of the Romans, all the way to these tiny sites and settlements. Coming right down through all of these ages of empire. Same chart right here, just done in a different way. We have full records for all of this. They will lead you all the way back. Coming up from Egypt, which is right down here, or over on this side, the enormous temples of this right down here, Temple of Bel or Baal or Baal. You may hear this name a lot today. The Babylonian systems or the Canaanite, the trafficker systems. Coming backwards from these opening empires of our world through all of these little bitty settlements and all of their megaliths, all the way back to right here, where Andrew is standing out there at that Durupınar site. And whether you believe that the Durupınar site was the remains of Noah's Ark, that remains to be proven, or if it were still somewhere on top of that ice-covered mountain. Either way, all of your records and your population growth, both mathematically and by all of your documentation, rewind to these spots right here.
And so we are in the mountainous region of this ancient kingdom. So that this site is in that area where Moses said the ark landed. And it fits perfectly then for that first criteria. Now, another criteria Moses said was that it was a boat that was 300 cubits long. Now, Moses was educated in Egypt, and at the time that he wrote this, Egypt was the basically the superpower of the day, and its empire and its measurement system was used throughout the region and around the world here for this area. And so we do find that if you look at the Egyptian royal cubit as being the standard of measurement and do the conversion to our measurements today, like feet, this object behind me is exactly 300 royal Egyptian cubits, or basically 515 feet long.
So to put this in perspective, Noah's Ark, no matter where it is, and that site is in fact the right measurements for the measurements given in the book of Genesis. Noah's Ark would be a little smaller than the Titanic, but is the size of a modern day super tanker. And in fact, the dimensions given in the book of Genesis are the most optimal for exactly the job that the ship has to do. I find it also fascinating where the boat took off from and where it landed. The boat probably didn't travel very far from where it took off from. It's really not designed to go anywhere. It's just designed to go up and come back down. That's all it's designed to do. Now, if you look at the bottom of the oceans, this is called the mid-oceanic ridge that I'm pointing out. This is it's like a seam on the bottom of the ocean floor. It's got hot volcanic water coming out from it to this very day. It's called the mid-oceanic ridge. It encircles the globe like the seam on a baseball. And I would like to just point out carefully that the flood model that we're talking about here works on a flat map of any type that you like, or on a globe model like seen behind me. Now, and I have to credit this work to Dr. Walt Brown, whose book In the Beginning is actually incredible, but he came up with what's called hydroplate theory. In that theory, the hydroplate theory by Dr. Walt Brown, your map as you see it today and your continents were formed as you see them today by that global flood. When massive pockets of underground subterranean waters of the ancient world burst forth, it spit water up into space so high that on some parts of the planet it came down as freezing ice. On other parts of the planet, if you were by where that hot searing water is coming forth, it would literally vaporize you in seconds. When that hot searing water burst forth, creating this mid-oceanic ridge that you see like a scar from the day of that global flood still on the bottom of the ocean floors. It's what separates your continents, creating the map that you see before you now. Walls of sludge buried and trapped billions of plants and animals, creating the layers of strata that you find underneath the ground. And those plants and biological animals that are in that strata are sorted under there by ecological systems, and the strata itself is sorted by weights and densities. In short, if you were nearby where that hot searing water is coming forth, it's going to vaporize you. And if you were even hundreds of miles from it, it's going to cover you in sludge and a wall of waves. So you're going to need to be somewhere very far away from any of these ridges. If you look over here where Noah's Ark actually landed, which is probably very close to where it took off from, where you're going to need to be located is somewhere where the water can rise fast, but it can't rise instantaneously where Noah's Ark is. Even if you had anchor stones on there, it's going to flip the boat. But if the water where the boat takes off from just rises quickly, like water in a bathtub with a boat at the back, if the water just rises rapidly, then your boat and your animals on board are going to be just fine. If you look at where the boat landed, which is not far from where it took off from, probably, it is about as far as you're possibly going to get on the entire map. It's about as far as you can possibly come from any of these oceanic ridges where you still have volcanic water coming out to this very day. And the boat, once it rests on top, is going to rock the hibernating animals on board to sleep. Now, a question that many ask, and a reasonable question, mind you, is Noah's Ark is it even possible? And if it is possible, can that boat actually hold and support all of the animals that would be required to populate the earth today? The answer to these questions, and I would be interested to find out what the wood from the pre-flood world was like, but even without that benefit, the answer to that question would be yes, that Noah's Ark is surprisingly and shockingly not just possible, but overwhelmingly possible. Yes, this boat seen here on the screen would do the job. In fact, in terms of population growth, using human beings, which, mind you, tend to breed slower than most all, at least 90% of the animal populations you're going to have on that boat. If you were to take 8 people at a population growth rate of just 2%, you hit 6 billion people in 1,100 years. Population growth happens far more rapidly than most people realize. More than this, I commonly hear it flippantly said on all sorts of television shows that some of these small settlements and sites have been there for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years. Little bitty sites, if you're actually out at them. Many of these things that are empires in Sumer and Akkad, these ancient sites, megalithic sites that are mesmerizing, they're smaller than modern day super Walmarts. But if you had hundreds of thousands of years of population growth, well, in 100,000 years, you would have hit 6 billion people on this planet. Millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and many more millions of times. So my question would be this: if you really are dealing with these kind of time frames in ancient history, where are all the bodies? But for the purpose of just this particular argument of will the ship do the job? Will Noah's Ark do the job? I'm going to use the Noah's Ark exhibit put forth by Answers in Genesis, and I would really recommend, even if you're an atheist, to go visit this. It is not just, inside that ship, it is a world-class, a first-class museum, unlike anything on Earth. It is worth putting on the bucket list of to-do things. Even if you live in a foreign country, you'd like to see the inside of that boat, and you're going to quickly realize that not only are there a lot of different formats that Noah and his son could have used to take care of all the animals on the boat, and not only do all of those animals fit on that ship that you're going to need, we're going to go through that in just a second, with enough room to play soccer on that boat between the animal cages, But more than this, that with all of the technologies available in the ancient world, even on the other side of the flood, you can take care of and manage all of those creatures easily. Take care of all those creatures on that ancient ship. So this is a model. It's a model of Noah's Ark, and it has 3 levels to it. So each level of this ark had not only food storage, but you have the containment areas for the animals. And then on the top deck, that's where the living spaces would have been for Noah and his family, or they could have easily been over in these areas. This is the area here for the storing of all of the food on board the boat. So, and you would have enormous areas on top of the boat, living quarters on top of the boat, where they could store food and even grow. You're right up here by where the sunlight comes in from the top section, the window described in Genesis. The top section, there's windows at the top of the boat, where you could not only grow food, but you could have in potted plants that are above. You could literally grow things, so you don't know how long you're going to be on board the boat. And the boat isn't really designed to go anywhere. It's just designed to float. You have enormous storage areas for all of the food on board the vessel. Now right over this way, and we have the living quarters for Shem. You have 3 sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And of the 3 sons, so in this depiction here in the living quarters, you have Shem looking at some of the old scrolls. On board this boat, you would also have the garments that were given to Adam and Eve by God. The garments that Ham would steal, the son Ham would steal. And as we come over to this section, you have the living quarters for Noah. And the scrolls, not only with the garments given by God to Adam and Eve have been on this boat. They would have been kept with Noah. These would have been prized possessions of Noah. But also the scrolls, the words, the prophecies of his grandfather from the book of Enoch would have been kept inside Noah's room. Now, speaking of the book of Enoch, here's a copy of the book of Enoch from the God in the Nutshell project. It's on the screen behind me, an ebook version of it. This came out very impressive looking. I'll tell you about that in just a second. But the book of Enoch it's a book that I myself and the God in the Nutshell project, as well as men that have worked on putting this together, including Jacob Tyler, whose web handle has always been Confound the Idols. But the book of Enoch, what I personally believe about, I believe it's the real McCoy. It is what it states that it is. A lot of people will disagree with me on that. I can make a solid case for that, and I've been actually walking through each section of it and doing commentaries on it to break it down in an easy to understand way. If in fact the book of Enoch is genuine, as I believe that it is, then these would be the words of the seventh from Adam, and they would have been on scrolls that would have come. They would have been prized possessions of Noah that would have been on board that very ship that we're looking at now, or recreation of that ship that we're looking at now. And these words would be the best record that you have in the entire world of what that pre-flood world was like. It covers the Nephilim, it covers the giants, it covers all of the things that would have been important to Noah and Enoch. That's what the book is, and that's what it purports to be. This right here on the screen behind me, this is how the book of Enoch starts. Mind you, it's just the first couple of paragraphs from Enoch 1:1, and it states this: Enoch, these are the words of the blessing of Enoch, wherewith he blessed the elect and righteous. Those are two different groups, perhaps Israel and the church. I'm going to lay that in your hands, but that's what he states. That's how he starts. These are the words of the blessing of Enoch, wherewith he blessed the elect and righteous, two specific groups that follow you all through the book of Enoch. The elect and righteous, who will be living in the day of tribulation. They're going to be living in this time of tribulation, like Jacob's time of trouble, the time of the end, time of tribulation, when the wicked and the godless are to be removed. And I, Enoch, a righteous man, notice how he affiliates himself with that second group. I, Enoch, a righteous man. That's a bold statement. And I, Enoch, took up my parable. He referred to his own life as a parable. And I, Enoch, was a righteous man. So he affiliates himself with that second group, the righteous, whose eyes were opened by a vision of the Holy One, which the angels, oh, this is a story about angels, which the angels showed unto me. And from them, these angels, I heard everything, and I understood as I saw. But not for my generation, not for Enoch's generation. So the words he's writing are meant to be on that ship. And these words pop up just about the time that the Mashiach appears each time. These words were meant to make it to your hands, according to these very texts in the first two paragraphs. But not for my generation, but for a remote one, perhaps your generation, which is for to come, the last generation of this age. And concerning the elect, well, wait a second, that's that first group, the elect and righteous. Concerning the elect, Israel, I wrote, and I took up my parable, my story. Enoch viewed his life in this place as a parable. In other words, what he's stating is the place that those angels come from, both the good ones and the dark ones, is you're living in a test, is what he's stating. That place that they come from, the place behind this place, is more real than this place. He believed his life was a story, a parable. And I took up my parable concerning them. I don't care who you are. The book of Enoch, it's a cool book. As someone that studies history or someone that's a biblical scholar, whether you believed in the book or not, it's certainly a book that you'd like to familiarize yourself with. Now, this copy that I have behind me, let me tell you a little bit about it. So this copy I have back here, and Jacob put a lot of work into this copy of Enoch. And also, this particular copy, so it's based on Michael A. Kneb's scholarly translation of the Ethiopian manuscript. Now, copies of the book of Enoch were found by explorer James Bruce in 1773 in Ethiopian Bibles. They had full copies of the book of Enoch in Ethiopian Bibles. This translation we're using here is based on that. If you become a partner on God in a Nutshell, even if it's the cost roughly of a movie ticket. The new copy of Enoch comes with it. It's yours to keep, watchable on any device that you desire. And all of our films, including many more that I'm holding in my hand right here, including ones that are not on YouTube or anywhere else, are available for streaming back there on God in a Nutshell, including the brand new films Vav Part 1 and Part 2, both with extended editions over there on godinanutshell.com, by the way. And if you get the DVDs of them, if you select to, you can have access to watch all of the films immediately. This way you don't have to wait for them to ship. But at least come over and get a copy of Enoch. Here's what the pages of Enoch look like. Now, when explorer James Bruce found copies in 1773 of Enoch in Ethiopian Bibles, which is what this translation behind me is entirely based on, those manuscripts, those documents in those Ethiopian Bibles matched perfectly with what you find with what was found in fragments of the book of Enoch found in the Dead Sea Scrolls in the caves of Qumran in Israel. Accordingly, I believe that not only can we make the case, a strong case, that Enoch is real, but more than that all your biblical texts are real. And these books are a walkthrough of the films. Exodus is my personal favorite. You also get the digital copies of these, as is seen on the screen, along with over for partners at godinanutshell.com with your copy of Enoch. There to kick back alongside your fire on a cold night with something warm to drink and go through these biblical texts complete with timelines. But delving us back into the pre-flood world of Noah and his 1, 2, 3 sons, the hours right after the pre-flood when they were on board that ship. Noah and these 3 sons would have been the only people, and their wives would have been the only people that had a recollection, of the details of that world before the flood. Your world today is lit by enormous pockets of oil. That's biological material that has been compressed underneath the ground. Entire ecological systems, jungles and all of their wildlife curled up and compressed into balls underground. In other words, the death of the world before this flood, the death of their world, is what is lighting yours. Now, all of those areas that you've been looking at are merely in the little tippy-top section of the very, very top of that boat, built and put together by Answers in Genesis. It's mesmerizing. It's got it may have hundreds or more of exhibits in there. I don't know how many that it has. But these are the living quarters of Noah and the 3 sons, or an example of what those may have been like. But it definitely gives you the impression when you begin to get the feel when you're there visiting that ship, or even looking at it through this video, that this boat would do the job. Shem is the one of the 3 sons that the highest blessing was put on Shem. This is the symbol of the Shem right here. Looks like a crown. It's for the number 300. It's the son on which the highest blessing would be put. And he come through the generations from Adam to Noah. And the name Noah means rest or comfort. So there are 10 generations from Adam down to Noah. And the 7th is Enoch. Enoch was the one. Enoch was not, for God took him. Enoch's name means teaching. These are the names behind me of the 10 generations from Adam down to Noah, as they're given to us in the book of Genesis. You'd have an incredibly difficult time convincing me that a rabbi concocted this in the Torah, in the pages of Genesis, from Adam to Noah. And they read, "Man appointed mortal sorrow, the blessed God shall come down, teaching," that's Enoch's name, "his death," whose death? God's death, "shall bring the despairing rest and comfort." That's Noah's name. His scroll would have been on board this boat, just like you see Shem over here. This is the son that the highest blessing was put on, the symbol of the Shem, sitting back, and he's reading the scrolls that would be on board this boat along with the garments. Now, as I turn this way, you've got Japheth. Japheth is sitting back here, and again, these are the living quarters on top of the massive boat, So they're depicted, and his wife is depicted here doing artwork. And notice they have very Middle Eastern looking living quarters. Now, as I move through this way, you have, and the boat would have had enormous sections where you could grow food and store food. You don't know how long you're going to be on board this boat. And the boat isn't really designed to go anywhere. It's just designed to float. And above all this, above where you have the potted plants that are dangling and growing, whatever they might be growing, in these areas where you have all sorts of food growing, right above this you have the windows that are described in Genesis, where the sunlight would go through, and it literally goes all the way down to all of the animals, even in the bottom. Now, these are the bird cages. These are the cages at the top for the birds, that Noah is going to literally use the birds like you see here. Here is Noah and his wife depicted in this display, and he's releasing the dove. Now, the dove is the symbol He released both a dove and a raven. Some of these cages contain, like this cage here, you have the crow or the raven, the dark bird, just like in the book of Job, when God asked Satan, "Where comest thou?" And Satan says, "From going to and fro in all of the earth." So worthless character, just roaming about like a lion seeking to whom he may devour. The same was described of the raven, that it went to and fro. It was a worthless bird. But the dove, here Noah is releasing the dove, which represents peace. The olive branch that it returns within his mouth also represents Israel, And it came back, and it was the symbol for the dry land that had appeared when Noah released the dove. Now, in terms of can all the animals fit on board that boat that you're going to need and repopulate the world? In this instance, I'm going to use the answer provided by the doctors and experts over at Answers in Genesis. And this is what they state. According to estimates published in 2014, there are fewer than 1.8 million documented species of organisms in the world. Consider also, now watch this, that over 98% of those species are fish, invertebrates, and non-animals like plants and bacteria. This means, and most of your insects, by the way, are going to survive on all of the floating stuff. And your amphibians. This means that there are fewer than 34,000 species of known land-dependent vertebrates in the world today. However, of those roughly 34,000 animals, the Bible uses the term kinds of animals. Like you have different kinds of dogs, but you know that they're dogs. You have tall dogs, short dogs, small dogs, furry dogs, hairy dogs, bald dogs, spotted dogs. But they all are types of dogs. Same things with cats, same things with turtles, same thing with birds. And also another thing that I'd like to point out is the genetics that existed before the flood. We have no idea what the genetics were like before the flood. But over time, you are losing things. Creatures are going extinct over time. You don't have any record of new creatures evolving over time. But you have many records of creatures, their whole organizations that keep track of how many animals go extinct every year. You're losing things over time, not gaining things over time. Ark Encounter, that's the people at Answers in Genesis, you need to go visit their facilities. They're really mesmerizing. Estimate that there are around 1,400 animal kinds on the Ark. And it is also anticipated that future research may reduce that number even further. Here's the bottom line of what they believe. The Ark Encounter team projects that there were fewer than 7,000 animals needed on board that Ark to populate the land animals that you need today. Another way to look at this with numbers that I've commonly used for Noah's Ark is that the boat could hold approximately 180,000 animals. And by animals, I mean full-size sheep. And 90% or better of the animals that you need for this boat ride are nowhere near the size of a full-size sheep. And more than that, I'm absolutely certain that Noah was wise enough to take the young ones. In fact, in the book of Yasher, it gives specific directions. God gives specific directions for what animals that Noah is to take and not take. And he's told, of course, and part of that, of course, is to take the young ones. Now, I'd also like to point out that in the universities, or the atheistic portions of the universities, I've commonly heard it said that there's just no way that this boat could possibly possess or contain the animals that would later populate the land mammals of the earth. So I'd like to point out to those atheistic university professors that state that, well, you're supporting Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. And in that theory, everything from the trees to the plants to the land animals to the turtles to the fish in the sea and every single thing between had to come literally from rocks. You need rocks to produce every single biological life form that populates this entire planet. And what I'm suggesting here with Noah's Ark and with the Bible and pretty much every written record of the ancient world at that time is stating is that, yeah, a boat packed full of many tens of thousands of animals is going to breed and become more animals. The numbers for that, if you had 75,000 animals, the size of full-size sheep, most of these animals are nowhere near that size, you'd only be at 42% of the capacity of that vessel. By the way, at 180,000 animals is what the boat will hold. 17,000, I've commonly gone with the number 17,550 animals times 2, or roughly. Now that brings you to 35,000 animals, and that's a high number compared to Answers in Genesis number on board that boat. And at the 180,000 animal level, that still makes provision for all of the food and the water that those creatures are going to need on board that boat ride. So in other words, in terms of the mathematics, and will the animals fit and can they populate the planet, in terms of Noah's Ark, from a mathematical perspective, that boat can float. All of these, so along the walls of the boat, you can see back and along the walls of the boat, you have all of those water containers. Now, to put this in perspective, as we move this way, you see all of these water jugs that are along the side, just hundreds of them. And then you've got these jugs here, these clay vessels, which are shaped just like an ancient vessel, with all of them with corks on the top. And the rows of these vessels, and the 3 stories of this ark are going to go all the way to the end. That's not even the end of the boat back there. And that's not even the beginning of the boat. This is just a small section of the ark. And the walls are filled, stock filled, many, many thicknesses deep, with all of these water vessels that are for the various animals that are on the boat, going all the way back down to the very end down there. All of these along the walls. Now as I move over this way, and you have thousands and thousands and thousands of these little containers for smaller creatures, but all sorts of little critters that are easily kept in a vase with a little bit of fabric tied right on the top. Noah's Ark was filled with thousands, literally thousands. So each of these bins, with each of these little guys here, these represent little water containers. And the boat is full of these along the sides of the walls, on both sides, in all 3 stories. And you have literally thousands of these little bins that are tilted and designed for the little animal droppings to all be collected into one area where the boys can scoop it out. Now I'd like to point out that Noah was only told to build the ark and make it suitable for a whole boatload, no pun intended, of animals, and also prepare food for both the animals and his family. It'd be interesting to know what kind of fruits and vegetables that they had at that time before the flood. But whatever the case, you're specifically told in the text, in both Genesis and more explicitly in Yasher, that the animals are not coming 2 by 2. That they're, well, in fact, behaviorally speaking, animals historically, all throughout time, have been the indicator of a storm coming. Noah's being told that the animals are going to, literally in Yasher, it's telling you that there were animals as far as you could see surrounding the boat, that the animals are coming to the ship. Noah's just to prepare the boat and to use the instructions God gave him for what creatures to take on board. And it's not 2 by 2. It's 2 of the unclean animals and 7 of the clean animals. Now you're going to find with the clean animals, well, these are creatures that, interestingly enough, of the many interesting aspects of the clean animals, these are creatures that simply don't breed as fast as, well, they don't breed as fast as what would be considered unclean, like a rabbit. And here again, though there were probably frogs and amphibians and insects on board the ship, as they've got in their displays and answers in Genesis, you actually don't need, not in my view, a lot of that stuff. And a lot of your insects are going to, I don't know, cockroaches seem to survive anything. You're going to have lots of floating stuff. And land mammals literally make up the smallest portion of what you have on this planet. What's needed on that boat is the smallest portion of the living things on this planet. Animals do indeed breed quickly, and many of them extraordinarily quickly, and they're going to spread into more areas far quicker than, in my view, the people would. Now, I have very often, I'll see on TV shows that they just commonly toss out these numbers. India and China, that this temple or that temple is 100,000 years. In fact, not long back, I was in a museum, in fact, a mainstream museum, and a little old lady in there got upset with me. She had an arrowhead in a glass case. This is a mainstream museum, and it had on the display that this little arrowhead was 100,000 years old, and I simply asked the lady, how would you possibly deduce that? And her argument, and the geologist's argument, was that the arrowhead wasn't carved as nice as other arrowheads. And I humbly and respectfully, I mean, what if the guy just needed a quick arrowhead? And if we're arguing, think of the vast amount of that time, that in 100,000 years old it's occurred, as a guy has gone from a more primitive looking arrowhead that he might have needed something quick because he was hungry, to a nicely chipped and painted arrowhead. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And a lot of these ancient sites, they might be megalithic and they might be very beautiful to look at, and the craftsmanship marvels modern engineers, but they're still very small sites. I'd like to point out that, well, for example, the first dynasty of ancient China is the Zhou dynasty. It's recorded to be roughly 2000 to 1600 BC. And it was founded by Yu the Great. Now, this is also, with all of the Chinese records, ancient records, they're worried about the Great Flood. There's no shortage of writing about that in ancient China. Yu the Great developed flood control out of concerns of a great flood. That's just what he did. Now about ancient India, I'll hear all the time that it's just hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years old. But in India, the Mauryan dynasty, well, that's 321 BC. Now, you had ancient temples and sites that are older than that are often called or considered dynasties that you're going to find. Let me explain that to you, because this is roughly at the same time of Alexander the Great, when he entered India in about 327 BC. And what Alexander records, well, is exactly that you had all sorts of temples. He was fighting all sorts of tribes that were coming out of those jungles that had ancient temples. But this is the first dynasty that politically brought together India. Before that, you had, well, exactly that, just like you had in Babylon, just like you had in Egypt, just like you had in other places. They're building temples and altars. You had impressive-looking temples and altars that are scattered out there in the jungle. But these dates are in the same range, India's case, China's case, and all of your ancient records are rewinding you back to the time, and many of them are talking about that great flood. And the animals are going to spread faster than the human beings and their temples that they're building in the jungles and the deserts. But in the case of the animals, you have far more of the ones that breed slower than the ones that breed like rabbits that are on board that boat. And just like you see with animals today, well, in that case, it's telling you in the text that these animals knew that the storm was coming. And they surrounded that boat as far as the eye could see, and only a few of them were going to get on board. And Noah was given special instructions on which animals were to be taken. And food can be poured into all these little slots. It's a full-time job for the boys and their families going through the areas of this boat. And the boat is fed from light coming through the ark from above, where you can actually see in here. The boat is filled with thousands, literally thousands, of these containers for different size and scope animals. Over here you have smaller little critters that are in all these little containers that are stacked here and stacked here. And this is just one area of the boat. There was some layout for how all these little animals are getting fed. This little guy here, look, they've got He's poking through, and he's in one of these little boxes. So they're in little bitty boxes that go back and forth, and their dung falls down these little slides. And you can see here how each one, how in the middle their little dung falls through, and you can just sweep it out at the back. The smart feeders. So right here you've got their little water vessel and their little food container. And their little holding units go like this, and down at the bottom you just sweep them out. There's a wealth of different ways that you instantly realize that are both simple and sophisticated to store and take care of all of those creatures on that boat in a variety of different formats. And if you're looking at the pages of Enoch, looking at the pre-flood world, it's a pretty sophisticated world. They definitely could have taken care of the animals and built a boat that would do the job, according to those pages. Now as I come to this side over here, what you've got is along the walls, all along the walls of that giant boat, where you see those vessels, those water vessels. So they can just take one, walk along the walkways on top that take you right above the cages on all 3 levels. Drop in a new bottle, there she goes. Pull out the cork, and you've got the water. So on board the boat, you're gonna need a way to feed and water all of the animals on board. And the water bottles are kept on the sides of the ship. And what I'm pointing out in this particular section here, so the ship has all of this scaffolding that goes over the cages. In Answers in Genesis work out of how the ship might have functioned. And these are just water tanks that easily could have been built in the world that directly followed the flood, and most definitely probably in the world just before the flood. And they walk on the scaffolding, they come over and they put a new water jug in, and those water jugs will facilitate to feed and water. So they have feed tanks on top, and or tubes or little tunnels that are made basically like bamboo shoots. So you just pour the feed in there. Up here you've got the boys pouring food and water down into their troughs. There they are. So here's these guys, and you can see their water bowl back here. The boys are coming along. You might not want to get as close to them. And you also have these water jugs that will water multiple different cages. An interesting workout that Answers in Genesis put together for the food and the water of the animals on board. But the cages for the larger ones, and the boys have these walkways above where they can come in and drop the water in. So it looks exactly like what you see here in the other room, where you've got right on top of here, you've got this food and water delivery system that comes down, and you can see these 2 big guys here. They're probably hibernating for a lot of the boat trip. When they wake up, they're going to want a little food and water, which is down there in their bowls, which feed not only one side, but if I come over here to the other side, we've got some other little animal guys. So yes, Noah's Ark would not only be functional, more than abundantly functional for the job that it's got to do, but in a variety of different formats. Take a look at it on the inside. Be fairly interesting, and dare I say, even for Noah and his family, possibly even quasi-comfortable up there at the top of that ship. But at every part of the inside of that ship it's a full-scale, first-class museum. In fact, they've got a virtual reality section where the boat literally takes off and you're on it, and the animals are screaming in every possible animal tongue. And they have an entire museum that's separate from that, with animatronic dinosaurs just going every possible direction, and displays that walk you through both that pre-flood world as well as Noah's actual ark in its physical actual size. Which sort of brings us full circle back to where we began. Back to the question of the hunt for Noah's Ark that is still ongoing in this modern age. What are you finding when you do the scans?
Well, the initial scans and that got a lot of people excited was done in the 1980s by Ron Wyatt. He was the American explorer and researcher who came out here after the site was dismissed as a freak of nature. And he promoted it and researched it and got other scientists involved and got the the Turkish government interested again in the site. And so his scans and those by Dr. Salih Barak Tutan and John Baumgartner in the 1980s show that there was a pattern and different layers below the ground.
So Ron Wyatt, seen here on the screen behind me, he spent roughly a decade of his life before he died working on the Durupınar site. And near the end of his life, people that had supported him for his life began to, they went along with the secular medias. And as he began to discover more and more things, and he got things wrong here, and he got things, and it remains to be seen if the Durupınar site is the Ark. He spent a decade on it, and people that should have defended him, they didn't. They turned on him. And I'd like to honor Ron Wyatt in this video. Ron Wyatt and his best friend, Richard Reeves. Now, the equipment that Ron had to work with at that time would look ancient by modern standards. And even to this very day, a lot of people will state of this Durupınar site that it was debunked, and a lot of them will state it's debunked simply because Ron Wyatt worked on it. That's got to stop. But here's what I know, guys. This Durupınar site is not only not debunked, very far from debunked, but the more that anyone looks at it and does new scans of it, the more fascinating that it becomes. Here's what I know more than that. If we were detectives, and this applies whether the boat is on top of the mountain in an ice cube or is sitting right there in an imprint in the ground right there at that Durupınar site, right in front of those two Ararat mountains. Here's what I know, is that if we were detectives, we would have to alleviate suspects. We'd have to alleviate this site as a suspect. That has not happened. The site has become more impressive the more work that's done on it. In fact, most of the men doing work on it, like Andrew Jones and Ark Scans and Discovered Media, these are shoestring budgets, guys. And I believe that we're living in hours of history. I'm the first guy that either wants to alleviate this site, the Durupınar site, which, by the way, you can take a tour of the Durupınar site with Andrew Jones. You can also go out there to the Red Sea Crossing with him or the real Mount Sinai. These are all stunning sites to go visit. So when I'm looking at Greater Ararat, and then that's Lower Ararat, and it's covered by some clouds there. Is that what I'm looking at?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, Lower Lesser Ararat. My finger in the camera, that would be right there.
Okay.
This is Greater Ararat. This is all of the lava beds, different villages down below. And if I turn the camera towards the visitor center, and I'm just going to slowly turn it, and there's some construction. They're going to try to make a children's playground, so the government never finished it. But here's the visitor center, and so that will give you an idea. This is the building you see in some of the old photographs.
Yeah.
So we're just on this ridge right below the building.
And if you're standing there at that Durupınar site, you're looking straight at those two Ararat mountains. You can visit both in the same trip, and Andrew can do it. But here's where I'm going with that I would like, in our lifetime, to figure out where many of these artifacts, including that Ark, is. Whether it's sitting right there where Andrew is standing, or whether it's on top of that mountain. So if any of you watching would like to actually physically go explore these sites, there will be contact information for Andrew Jones. If you want to get more involved in these projects, if you want to actually help find some of these things, as I do, if you want to help in any possible way, certainly use it. Some of the oldest ruins in the world are around this site. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, so Dr. Salih Barak Tutan and some other American researchers, they were looking at the top of this mud flow. Now, the mud flow, we're at about the 6,500 foot elevation, but when you see on a satellite map or with a drone photograph, you follow this mud flow to the top of the mountain here. Now, right below that escarpment of rock up there, that's where they found ancient remains of a settlement.
Okay, here's what Andrew is stating. So here's the Durupınar, or the Ark formation right here. Now, there was an earthquake, and that uncovered the formation. And the formation is actually part of a mud flow or an earth flow that came down. It's believed that this formation, or the boat, if that's what it be, was originally on top of this ridge up here, what Gilgamesh might have been calling the Wall of Heaven, what some call Doomsday Mountain or Judgment Mountain. And that's why Noah would be looking straight at the mountains of Ararat as is recorded in Genesis and see the tops of the mountains. But whatever the case, that this formation, whether it's the boat or not, was originally way high up here on top of this ridge, and due to an earth flow, it slid down to right here where it's sitting. That's what Andrew is talking about.
When they interviewed some of the really old people who lived here back then, who remember what it was like before the earthquake, they said this mud flow was just perfect farmland. It was just smooth. They would grow their crops on it. And then in the late 40s, an earthquake hit. And basically, it's called actually an earth flow versus a mud flow. And this seismic activity, because this area is very unstable, caused the ground to become liquid almost, and basically creates this earth flow. And that's when the boat formation initially popped out. It was the only area that stayed stable because there's something, again, below the ground, which we believe it's Noah's Ark.
This on the screen, this is another one of the scans. This red line right here represents the ground level. I can't emphasize enough that I hope we're living in the age where many of these artifacts will be uncovered. Coming over to God in the Nutshell actually helps with that search. But if you look down here at the bottom of the ship, does that look like the back of a boat to you? This site either needs to, in our age, be confirmed so the next stages of this would be core drilling to find out, or digging to find out what's under there, to either confirm that the site is indeed Noah's Ark, or to alleviate it as a suspect for being Noah's Ark. I've got to be honest, that the more scans that they do, the more it sort of looks like a boat.
Below the ground, you're seeing this structure just inside the formation itself versus out in the mud flow, you don't see anything.
So it has structure underneath where the boat is, but if you do your scans in the other place, it just looks like mud and a mud flow. So it looks like a boat and a mud flow, is what it looks like.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, these people who were brought in 2019,
right.
The American GPR team, and then the Turkish scientist in 2021 for the ERT, these are random people hired, professionals in the field, to collect the data.
My name is Trey Smith of God in the Nutshell. I want to thank you for watching this film on Noah. If you want to continue the journey with us, I would invite you to come over, and hope you do come over to godinthenutshell.com, where we've got some deeper dives on all of these subjects that I think you're really going to enjoy them. This is the Volve Part 1 in my hand. The time of the making of this film, the Volve Part 2 is actually finished, and we continue to walk through the Genesis. We're going to walk all the way through Exodus and beyond over there on God in the Nutshell. Come over and at bare minimum get a copy of the Book of Enoch from us. I think it's a really, really nice copy of the Book of Enoch. Also, full copies of the books, which look stunning on a coffee table, but also look absolutely incredible as an ebook. Complete copies of all of these books will come also on ebook with your copy of Enoch. I just want to thank all of you for watching and coming with us on this ride. My name is Trey Smith of God in the Nutshell. God bless every last one of you and your families on the other side of the screen. Oh, and one more thing. Did I forget to mention that we also have the coffee mugs, by the way. God bless all of your families, and God bless America. Many more journeys await over at godinthenutshell.com.